Hey folks, my name is Shannon. I work for Cornell University at the Geneva Agricultural Experiment Station. I actually work in a division of the Food Science Department doing product safety validations for processed foods entering the market. So if you're making anything like kimchi, salsa, hot sauce, really anything after that fresh product to be brought into the marketplace, you would come through our program at the Food Venture Center to get that validated in order to safely bring it to the marketplace. And then there's the Produce Safety Alliance, which is kind of a sister program, if you will, as far as the FSMA Act, the Food Safety Modernization Act, hopefully a buzzword that everybody is somewhat familiar with at this point. Last year, or maybe 2 years ago at this point, the first major overhaul in food safety regulations are coming onto the play within the last 70 years. So it's really major as far as farmers and growers, producers coming onto the scene, needing to actually implement, develop and implement new practices to make sure our food is safe. So the Produce Safety Alliance has put together a curriculum that I will go over very briefly, and a small portion of just one of their modules that they have developed in compliance with the FSMA Act and the Produce Safety Rule part of the FSMA Act coming onto the scene here. I do have a couple flyers here. One, just a fact sheet on the Produce Safety Alliance. They have a ton of information on their website and just a plethora of expertise and knowledge, and are really the folks that, if you do have any further questions that I can't answer today, will be who you want to be in touch with. Dr. Betsy Bin is the director of that program and knows all this stuff from front to back. And then this other sheet I have is the compliance chart. So depending on your size of your actual operation, there are different timelines that you'll actually have to comply with the regulations. So that'll be helpful for you folks. As far as the sizes of farms that most of us probably fall into as a category are the very small business farms. So in between 25,000 and 250,000. So in terms of compliance for produce, you won't really have to worry about any of these things at least until 2019, probably more like 2020 in most of your produce areas. So with all that said, we're going to go through this Module 6, Post-Harvest Handling and Sanitation, and then we can kind of open up to discussion if you have any further questions. I will go through this briefly, and actually definitely will say that I recommend everyone go through the actual training for the Produce Safety Alliance curriculum that they have established for the grower training part of this FSMA Act. So the first part of really putting into place any kind of food safety system on our farms are the basics, keeping things clean. We want to make sure that we keep in mind we want to have a clean facility during harvest on the fields, and then what we actually bring into our packing houses, and really considering what kinds of things can impact that. Obviously ourselves, humans, what we touch, our clothing, any kind of packing equipment that we use in the field, picking containers, and then post-harvest water that we would actually use when bringing it into the facility, coolers, storage areas, transportation vehicles. All these things are really essential to really be basically in clean sanitary condition. So using basic housekeeping practices is really important. Implementing any kind of worker training, and the Produce Safety Alliance has some really great resources on that itself. Also taking a look at our pest management program, any kind of pest debris in and around our facility and our farms, and minimizing standing water. So we'll go through those in a little bit more detail later on. Cleaning and sanitizing actually are two very different things. And in order to properly clean and sanitize something, there is an actual step-by-step process that we'll follow when actually going to look at a produce and then any kind of food safety contact surfaces, and out from there into what we'll call zones. So worker training for harvest and post-harvest practices. Workers must know first and foremost if there is any kind of produce that is in the field contaminated with any kind of wildlife feces. That's a number one rule, not to actually harvest that. Keep it in the field, don't touch it. Any kind of dropped produce should also not be harvested. And then our workers themselves, ourselves, keeping good health and hygiene practices. Pretty straightforward. Any kind of practices and policies that you might have on your farm should be developed, trained, and implemented and understood within your workers. As far as good, clean clothing, footwear, what you might come in contact with on the bottom of your feet, then bringing it into the facility, sometimes something we don't think about. Gloves, hairnets, if you have any jewelry policies, and then actually having distinct places where you might have designated worker break areas, hand washing stations with proper soap and disposal of paper towels, and restrooms. And as far as the actual packing area, once we're bringing something from the field to our facility, no two packing facilities are really designed the same. And there's a lot of variation that we might come into contact with as far as a closed facility versus an open facility. It's really important that we actually be able to acknowledge realistically what kind of packing facility that we have. A lot of smaller scale farmers are working in an open area scene and potentially have a lot more susceptible areas to contamination, dirt, debris, roosting areas for birds up in the high beams of our facilities, things like that. So looking at that in particular to be able to actually assess our risks will be really important when we're starting to actually develop a program. And reducing those risks by looking at some really easy things and tips that we can become accustomed to. Keeping things clean, pretty basic, also very, very crucial. And we'll go through that cleaning process, what that actually looks step by step in a moment. Proper hygiene facilities, break areas like I mentioned. Pest management, you actually might hire out for this with a third party to actually take care of that for you. And important with that to note would be the proper record keeping that they actually provide you so you can have that at your home base and know that they're complying with what your policies are for reducing pests and managing that well. Avoiding standing water, also one of the biggest things, looking at our facility from a microbial level. Standing water in particular is a huge area of open harborage for potential contamination, specifically Listeria monocytogenes, that we can't see, taste, or touch. So looking at really basic things like standing water, having good kinds of practices, sweeping, squeegeeing, things like that, proper drainage in our facilities to mitigate that risk, and keeping it organized so that things can actually be properly taken care of the next time we want to use it. And in order to do this, we actually can look at it from a flow chart kind of point of view. So looking from when you actually enter your packing facility from the field and how that flow looks. Ideally, we want it to be a nice flow so that you're not actually backtracking from the point of which you actually enter your facility, so that it can be a really well thought out plan and thus reducing the ability to actually contaminate an area. And how we do this is actually designate zones. So the biggest area actually is those food contact surfaces, those ones that are most susceptible to potential contamination to actually getting onto and into other areas of our facility. From there, you'll actually zone out from number 1, non-food contact surfaces, floors, ceilings, the outsides of your equipment, and then kind of out from there all the way to the outside of your facility. This is one example of that. And I'll just go through the zone 1, most important part and biggest concern because of potential cross-contamination with our produce. Any kind of harvesting materials, bins, worker hands, conveyors, belts, whatever we're using to actually sanitize our water packing area, things like that, and should be really focused on as the most immediate impact on food safety within our area and our produce. Developing sanitation practices will help us reduce those risks. So those may include any kind of worker training, as I've mentioned, pest control programs, cleaning and sanitizing those food contact surfaces, converting any kind of equipment to be easily accessible and easily cleanable, and then as well as maintaining proper conditions within our storage coolers and dry storage areas, and then even our transportation vehicles. So what is the difference between cleaning and sanitizing? Cleaning is actually the physical removal of any kind of dirt or soil from an area. You can use, mostly used is clean water, and then also some kind of detergent. And detergents can be geared towards any number of areas. If you're working with animal foods, there's some detergents that are more that are better for fat removal. There are others that are better for carbohydrate removal, things like that. And sanitizing, on the other hand, are actually the treatment of any kind of surface to reduce the microbial load. So we're really looking at the spoilage microorganisms, the pathogenic bacteria, something that can actually reduce the load of that microorganism. Really important point, as this slide points out, you cannot sanitize a dirty surface. So that first 3 steps actually of the cleaning process are essential to actually then sanitize a product. Cleaning always comes first. So step 1, removing any obvious dirt or debris from a food contact surface. You can use brushes, clean water. It's actually advised not to use any kind of high pressure water in this because that can actually cause more of a spread throughout into a larger area if it is contaminated with a pathogen. So that's interesting to note. Number 2 in the process is applying any kind of appropriate detergent depending on what kind of food that you are working with, scrubbing that surface. Number 3, rinsing off that surface, using most usually clean water to make sure you actually remove the detergent as well as the soil that was present in that area. And number 4, applying a sanitizer on that food contact surface. Rinsing may or may not be necessary, and it's very important that you actually follow the directions on your label that have been approved through regulation and EPA recommendations from your manufacturer. So the best case scenario is that we have very cleanable, well-designed equipment for our facilities and our food production. But that's not always possible in a lot of our scenarios. But ideally, we've got a food contact surface that is non-toxic, non-absorbent, durable, easy to withstand any kind of corrosion, and easily cleanable. We want to be able to actually have something that is designed to install and installed to facilitate cleaning and sanitizing. Stainless steel, really great, and probably number 1 what we'd want to be putting into a facility if you are into those development stages. And as I said, best case is not always possible. So we really want to look at, especially with those farmers that work a lot with wooden equipment, not always as easy to clean and sanitize, but is still workable and just something more to consider as far as how rigorous our cleaning and sanitizing operation and process might be. So Cleaning the wooden reusable types of equipment is possible, and developing those cleaning schedules to reduce those risks and prevent biofilm formation is very important in that cleaning process. And new equipment can be designed and easily cleaned, definitely ideal if possible and feasible. Reducing risks before entering the packing area. As I mentioned before, even as simple as the types of shoes that we're wearing, what we might come in contact on the field, being just really aware of that and what we might be tracking into the facility. Using clean harvest bins before using them, and actually being able to reduce and mitigate the amount of soil that we might have on the bottoms of those bins, in the bins, around the bins, and what we might actually be bringing into our area to reduce the potential contamination, as well as the organic load in our wash water. If we can do best practice to actually reduce the amount of soil on the bins as well as the produce before it goes into the wash water, organic material can actually decrease the ability of the wash water and sanitation within that process. Packing area maintenance should happen very, very regularly. Inspection is ideal with any kind of operation before you use any type of equipment, as well as even your transportation equipment, making sure to avoid any kind of cracked seals, hoses, standing water, dirty conveyor belts, brushes, and establishing good cleaning practices before and after use of all those types of things. Condensation, walls, ceilings, usually specifically within your cooling areas, should be well cleaned and regularly maintained. Packing containers, only new single-use containers or cleanable, reusable containers should be used to pack produce. So there is some leeway there, and really, as a packer, you are required under the rule to be able to take steps that are necessary to create a clean type of container to reduce the amount of microbial potential as best as possible. Packing containers and materials should be stored in a easily accessible area that is completely separate, and hopefully a dry, cooler storage area that is away from any kind of pest infestation, dirt, and other contaminants. Transportation, many types of vehicles are used within the farming industry, sometimes open trucks, as well as closed vans, wagons, all kinds of things are used, and also multi-use. So we want to take into the consideration these types of things when actually hauling our produce from the field to our packing area. All kinds of vehicles should be inspected prior to loading or prior to receiving any kind of produce. If you actually hire out transportation, having within your own worker training program steps to actually inspect a vehicle, even right down to the smell. If you smell something funky when receiving your produce, that's a really great indication that there might be something wrong there, and to take note of or talk with the driver about, and even ask for their records of their cleaning schedule. If refrigeration is required, it's also very important to actually maintain that proper temperature control even before you actually load up the produce. So you'll want to have logs for that. And speaking of logs, standard operating procedures are a great guide to actually establishing a good program within your cleaning and sanitation system. They can be developed for all kinds of things: monitoring your pests, cleaning and sanitizing, actually creating those solutions, your water to sanitizer, as well as the actual produce in your packing line, cleaning and monitoring cold storage areas, inspecting your trucks, developing really easy logs for these too. They don't have to be super elaborate. They can be a simple check mark, date, the temperature recorded at a point in time for your vehicle, and a quick signature of who did it. Corrective actions would come into play if something bad has happened. And really assessing how bad that incident is very important to actually then determining what we might do with the situation. So assessing the situation, has the produce actually been affected? Can it be stored and later determined what we might do with it, or should it be actually thrown away right on the scene? What is the cause of the problem? What needs to be done in order to correct it? And then adjusting any kind of practices to address those risks, keep proper records, and monitor them so that the corrective actions have been fixed at that point. Some examples of what corrective actions should be considered if you do have a pest infestation: contamination of the packing house by any kind of blood, bodily fluid accident. That's a really big indication that something bad has gone on. Drains, any kind of backup in there, definitely something that would be considered a corrective action issue, and any situations that pose an immediate contamination risk to your produce. Record keeping is always critical, and what we actually like to say is if it is not written down, it didn't happen. And that is very much how regulation sees any kind of practices that we might put into place within our packing house, commercial kitchens, any kind of food facility. Record keeping is essential to maintaining a proper process. Any kind of records might actually include pest management, as we've gone through the packing area, storage and cleaning. Some of this is a little review. And then absolutely must have cleaning logs and record keeping for your sanitizing of tools, contact surfaces, and containers and equipment. In summary, all packing areas, regardless of their age, design, size, must have good sanitation practices to minimize contamination risks. Identifying food contact surfaces is essential to that plan, establishing zones within your facility to know how big of a risk each area is, and what the difference actually is between cleaning and sanitizing, making sure those are both a part of our plan. You cannot sanitize a dirty surface, and all of these things are needed in conjunction to have a good food safety plan in place. That is all I have a part of the presentation. I do have a couple Q&A that NOFA put together as far as common questions that they have come through their call center. So just a few I might run through, and then we can open it up to any kind of questions and discussion. Let's see. Do I have to wash my greens with Sanidate? No. Sanidate is not required, and a sanitizer does not actually sanitize the produce. Really important to understand. A sanitizer is actually used to keep the water clean and prevent cross-contamination within your product. So that's really important and often a misconception. The produce safety rule does not require that you actually sanitize your water. It does require that you maintain proper water quality to assure it is safe. Let's see. Can I sell closed bags or containers of greens at the farm market? The answer is no, actually not through the Produce Safety Rule and the FSMA Act, but actually through the State of New York and Department of Ag and Markets. They do not allow the sale of closed greens in a container at a marketplace, especially mixed greens. And there's It's a little bit hard to navigate these types of things. We all have seen closed containers, you know, those bags with twist ties at the market. So not to say everybody is actually complying with this, but I have gotten confirmation. Yes. Next question here. Do I need to label my products if I sell them in bags? The product itself must not be labeled. There should be labeling within your actual stand somewhere around the produce to notify the farm and location that you are selling from and the actual product name of that product. Can I sell ready-to-eat greens? Ready-to-eat actually requires a commercial kitchen license through the state of New York. So if you don't have a commercial kitchen license that you're actually washing, processing your greens, processing meaning doing any kind of washing, really at the point of even cutting a head of lettuce is considered processing. So in order to do that, you would need to actually have a state license for a commercial kitchen. There are all kinds of items that are exempt as far as the raw agricultural commodities, things that are not typically consumed raw, and is quite a long list. So I won't go through that, but it actually, there is information on this in other modules of this curriculum. But you can start to think of things that we don't typically eat raw. If you are on a well, do you have to have test your wash water? The water rule is actually still proposed, and it is not yet into place. So that's really important to know. But if you are using well water, yes, you should be testing your water at least once a year, twice a year if you've got a bigger operation. Typically you would do that at the beginning of the season, and then once when you're actually putting together and washing a lot of produce at one time. If you're on municipal water, you'll want to have the records of that at least yearly.